Recording in progress.
Ray, the city leadership in the room. Appreciate it very much. And guests, welcome you all. I turn it over to our city administrator, Allison Jones, for your presentation.
Thank you, Council President Well, council members, Mayor Norton, members of the public. We also have a lot of staff here today. So first, just want to start off by thanking you for the study session last week. And this time, I would just recommend if you have questions as we go, I think that would probably be helpful. So this is follow-up information to the questions and discussion that you had on the budget on the 21st of August. So we start right in with the property tax levy. That was a fair amount of questions. And the property tax formula is really, it is fairly complex when you do this property by property, but the county auditor does determine those tax rates based on market value, tax capacity, and then applying the tax levy amount to that and then spreading that across all of the different categories of property. Folks can visit the YouTube video that we created that really explains how they could expect changes to happen to their specific tax bill. But thanks to our partners at Olmsted County, we did get some information this morning about their updated property tax and anticipated property tax assessments for 2024. And so what we tried to do is show what some of the changes would be. And you can see even within residential that the class rate starts to change based on valuation of home. When you get over that $500,000 range, which changes significantly how the tax is applied. So for these different average values of home, assuming that they're changing at the average amount of valuation, with this tax levy amount, you would see about a $45.94 change in tax levy for the parcel that's about $200,000. Conversely, there's some different things that start happening if you're over a $500,000 home. And so that type of home would absorb about $143.58. Again, this doesn't take into account how much someone's assessed valuation might have changed. And that is a huge impact on every individual tax bill that folks receive, whether the tax, even if the tax was no change from the prior year. But you can also start to see up in the yellow that the tax rate doesn't change much. And if you recall, for the last 10 years, we've been hovering around that 51 or 52% tax rate. So we're still far less than that in this recommended budget. And you can also see that the estimated property valuation growth actually increased from the April estimate. In April, we were estimating about 6%. And as of the updated numbers from August, that was about a 6.77% estimated increase in the total taxable market valuation of property within the city of Rochester. And about 1.32% of that is coming from new construction. So again, new construction always absorbs that tax levy adjustment or the total tax levied first. And this is just to provide some context. The percentage change year over year has wildly vacillated. You can see in 2021, that was a zero levy year, but that is also the year that the voter approved parks referendum came online. So the actual tax levied was more than 0% increase because of that coming online from the voter approved referendum. And then this is also just a reminder that what actually gets collected, so that top line, is always going to be slightly different than what we budgeted for. So we're budgeting all the way up until those tax bills go out, but there could be appeals, there could be non-payments, there could be a property that's sold where deferred payments are made. There could be a change there in classification, something of that nature, or something could come online with a building permit sooner than anticipated or later than anticipated. So every single year, it's been slightly different than what was budgeted. But typically that amount hasn't vacillated too much. Those are just the dollar amounts necessary in those years in order to be able to deliver the budget that is recommended. And again, this is the change. The blue line is the tax levy adjustment year over year that would be recommended or anticipated even out into the future years with the current Holistic Budget Stability Fund support as it was programmed. And so what you can kind of see here is that percent change year over year of the increase Even if you didn't use any holistic budget stability funding, you would see a higher increase this year and a lower increase next year. But that's a year over year percent change. The dollars necessary to do the work that's recommended would be the same. So I'm just trying to explain that it's somewhat arbitrary to be looking at the percent in the sense that it will vacillate, and some of the expenses in 2024, for example, that are recommended are one-time expenses that don't carry forward to 2025. And this is just another way of looking at that, explaining why the year over year change occurs differently based on you have less holistic budget stability in 2024, then you end up actually having a larger increase year over year. There are a lot of different programs available to help folks with their property taxes if they are experiencing challenges based on their income or other factors. So the homestead exclusion program, that's anyone in a certain value of home is eligible for that. It changes as the value of your home changes. So that's something that people see. They can, and it's just very important to make sure that your home is actually listed as a homestead eligible property in order for that to apply on your property tax. So folks should go check that out on the Olmsted County website and make sure that, especially if they've purchased a home this year that they are occupying, that they should make sure that they have that homestead exclusion filed on their property. And then there was a positive change at the legislature in 2023. They lowered the year over year targeting refund from 12% to 6%. So some folks should be seeing some changes based on the prior categories of homestead credit refund. That's a direct refund from the state, and the income requirements have not changed though for claiming either the homestead credit refund or the renter's property tax refund. The special homestead classification for blind or permanently and totally disabled persons, and this came up. There is actually a web link you can click on if you're in the online version, but apparently the text changed to white. So that's a special classification that can reduce the class rate for folks who qualify. There's also a market value exclusion for disabled veterans with a number of different qualifications. A senior citizen property tax deferral that's available. Again, these you go through the state program to apply for. And then there are some direct tax rebate payments that are coming from the state of Minnesota related to that last slide. And you can find more information about all of these on the Minnesota legislative website about the homestead credit refund program, the renter's property tax refund. So folks that rent can claim a deduction at certain income levels on their income tax return. And also the targeting property tax refund program that I mentioned that's based on increases year over year. And these are all the places that you can go in order to get that information. But we got a lot of questions about what decision packages or sort of new resource was recommended. These are the levy related amounts for these decision packages. Happy to run through these. The city internship program would be a continuation that would fund for summer interns to try to continue to grow the pipeline for folks who are aware of service and all the different types of departmental work that we do in the city of Rochester. We were very successful and had a lot of applications this year, more than we thought we would have for the first go around. That was some one-time funding. And so this does recommend continuing that, but a slightly fewer number of folks. Again, really important that we keep up with our IT and security related to cyber attacks, and we're doing more and more and more online with software. That is a blessing and also sometimes an expense in order to continue to maintain that. So those two add up to about $100,000 on this page. Expanded tech support. So this would be the first time after we've centralized our IT resources that we would be providing IT coverage, both basically 24/7 through some on-call support and some work on the weekends. So nighttime would be on call, and then the 7-day a week. Obviously, we're very reliant across all of our services on technology these days, on our computers, on our phones, on all of those things to get work done. And so this is the net levy amount based on some reorganization and adding some different service hours that would be required in order to provide that. And that would be the first time in the city that we actually have that level of support. becoming more and more important as we continue to have more and more that we do with software and online. And then you've been hearing about this for a while, the software and 311 public information system. So this would be a way for us to have a ticketing system. So when we get, oftentimes from our partners on council, sometimes the mayor's office, requests for any number of things, whether that is a boulevard tree or tall grass and weeds or a barking dog, things of those nature that sometimes get to 911. But oftentimes get to an individual. This would allow for the resourcing to be able to pull up a 311 system that would be available in a number of different ways, and be able to centralize that, track the information. Folks would that are calling in would be calling to that resource instead of some of our teammates get a lot of phone calls and then they also go handle the phone call. So this would allow them to focus their time more on handling the results of the requests that came in.
Mr. Wall, can I ask a question?
Please, and please feel free to ask questions as we go through the decision packages.
I support the 311 system. I think it's a great system. I have some questions on it. Do you believe that we're going to have some savings on this overall?
Councilmember Palmer, I think that's a great question. I would probably say that you will not necessarily save dollars and spend less, but I think that you'll utilize your dollars much more efficiently. So as you're continuing to see success here, you'll be able to see trends. Like, are we getting a lot of calls for X, Y, and Z? That might be something we need to resource differently. I think that as you're seeing the calls come in, we might need to, over time, better resource the 311 system, but then you wouldn't have extrapolated out more and more maintenance or name your position that's taking phone calls and delivering the service. So I think it will mitigate costs over time. You could see some savings, but typically what I've seen in other cities is you actually get more uptake on people calling in order to address a problem. And you start to uncover that perhaps there's something that we could do differently. Sometimes that's just resourcing differently in our existing resources, but sometimes it will show a trend that says, and if we really want to achieve a different service level, then that's a policy question for the city council on whether you'd like to resource that in a different way.
And so I've used it in other communities. The first thing they tell you is if it's emergency, call 911. If it's not, call this number, and then it has a tree of different things you can call. Is this one person, one department that's going to handle this, or is it going to, if you want a building safety question, it's going to say punch number 8, or you?
This would be a staffed, resourced, answered phone line, phone, chat, and likely online to be able to send. So someone could even just submit a request online, similar to what we have now, but much more robust. So I believe, if I am recalling correctly, it would be reorganizing 2 or 3 positions, existing positions from departments to bring that in. And then there's 1 FTE. The remainder of that cost is the cost of the ongoing annual costs for the software. The actual software purchase is funded with the Holistic Budget Stability Fund, so one-time funding. So it wouldn't just be like a phone tree. It would be people answering the phone, asking questions, logging in the information, routing it to the proper department so that they would have their lists of things that people are calling in for. It would potentially integrate with some of our other software or replace some other software that's currently a lot of different softwares to track a lot of asset management.
And would this be 24 hours a day then?
I don't believe, well, 24 hours in the sense that you could probably submit your request online 24 hours, but typically we would set the hours based on when actual people are available to answer the question. And if, again, it would be available and say to call 911 if it's an emergency 24 hours, but it wouldn't be staffed 24 hours. And typically the calls that would be coming here are not emergency phone calls.
Thank you.
But it also could relieve some of the pressure that's at dispatch right now for some of the types of phone calls that they get on the emergency and non-emergency line.
Just to follow up, I guess I knew we were working towards this, but where would this be staffed out of, which department?
We haven't fully decided which department. Right now we have it landing in community development, but as it spins up, we had planned to have an existing person in administration started off and then determine based on how many calls for service. It's likely that we'll get a lot of calls for service that are related to community development. But in other places, it's typically still somewhat of a standalone division because it needs to really be supporting all of the different departments that have calls coming in and not having a lead to any one thing. But you would have subject matter experts that they learn over time how to direct the different calls into the system and what kind of information needs to go in. And that's part of what you build into your software system so that it's routed properly.
Okay. Again, I was just a little worried because I saw it here grouped in with IT sort of things. To me, it would make more sense to be an administration to start out and then figure it out from there.
And it is an administration to start out. I believe we actually put the dollar amount in community development because some of the positions would be coming from there. But it's actually no real rhyme or reason to the order of the decision packages here either. So for the rest of the slides, and if you had gotten the original version of this, we added those 2 slides, slides 3 and 4. So everything here is, so like slide 14 here was slide 12 on Friday, just for clarity.
Councilmember Dennis.
All right, thank you. So I'm glad we're going item by line item to ask questions. So moving back to the internship program, as a teacher, I think this is phenomenal, having more opportunities for youth to be involved. Is this, I know there's the Bloomberg interns the Mayor Bloomberg interns who took over the city council offices. Is this part of that funding, or is this something?
Good
I
question.
mean,
So
just
that's actually not
connection.
an internship. So the administration worked with the mayor in order to apply for funding for a 2-year fellowship. So the person who came through that funding source has their master's degree and is a 2-year fellowship that's paid for by that grant funding. It's not this. And that person is located in administration. And then the city internship program have all been either high school or college age folks in the summer. And so those folks, that's what this would fund, is the pipeline program. So they're 2 separate things. One is a fellowship that's 2 years of ongoing 40+ hour a week work funded, not from the city of Rochester. And then this would be that city internship program. in
Okay,
administration.
so like Councilmember Bransford's daughter is an intern, so it would be kind of like that program with the city with the funding. Okay,
Yep,
So
so
what difference does it make?
I'm curious if that's part of the.
Yeah, but you had to bring up my daughter, huh?
So the internship program was a competitive process. It was listed on our application site. We had, I don't know, 25, 30 people apply and ended up accepting 7 different people who rose to the top through a competitive program. And that's how they're selected. It goes out as just like any other job would. It's paid. So people have to qualify for it. They have to apply for it. And then we make sure that all of the other HR rules are applied. And so if someone has some sort of relationship, then we make sure that they're not working directly with that person, just like every other position in the city of Rochester.
Thank you. And then I have one more question. I have a question about IT, but I apologize. I did not know it was secretive, so I apologize. I
It's
apologize
not
for
a
that.
secret.
The
It's not
question,
relevant.
well, it's part of the internship. I was
For a
trying
lot
to
of
understand,
interns
so.
like her, huh?
So my other question was about IT. And so I understand, I mean, weekend IT, I haven't had email all weekend because of IT issues. So I understand the importance of that. But my question is, we had Mr. Dale Martinson who was part of, he had the IT and the finance department. That was divided up. Now there's 2 separate positions, so incredibly high paying, wonderful positions for IT and finance, which I'm not arguing. I mean, we do need to find someone for finance. That would be nice. But the IT, having just one person now specifically for IT, wouldn't that help alleviate some of the need for that 211,000?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Dennis. This is really, so 100 for the IT support, that would be 143,000. We actually have reorganized some positions that were in specific departments into IT, and the IT manager, not director, is really important for the continued strategic investment, staying ahead of the curve of things that are coming from IT. It is very rare and uncommon in today's day and age to have a combined IT and finance department based on all of the needs that are coming to us and regulations from the Government Finance Officers Association, from the Government Accounting Standards Board that requires a lot of different reporting. And then also from cybersecurity issues that are happening, staying ahead of different software and different equipment that are needs for the organization, making sure that we are selecting things that are not conflicting with our network. It's just a much more complex world than it was 40 years ago when that position was created as a joint position. Thank you. So this one actually is sort of repurposing it also. This is a good example of, we sometimes have contract works, sometimes have uh, different models of how work is done. And this came forward from the Parks and Recreation Department to have a new position, but it's really coming from an existing set of dollars with some additional cost to it. And what this would do is make what was a golf pro into a recreation coordinator position. So that's a lot more year-round value for a position like that. So obviously that position doesn't cost $39,000, but that's the net difference in the existing model and what this would be. And that allows for flexibility to be able to help at the volleyball center, which is actually staffed by one staff member. Very, very, very busy program that could also allow for other year-round and winter month support for different programs and activities that are happening for very low investment, but really a different way of looking at the work of that position. Another new position, but again, always these tend to have caveats, and that's how they end up in the recommended decision packages. So this would be a new assistant clerk too. The cost, again, $73,000, but that's not the total cost, but that's the net cost to the tax levy. So what will typically happen in the budget, unless we smooth it out, is that every other year you're at about $300,000 or $400,000 higher in the city clerk's office in order to operate 2, 3, or sometimes 4 elections. We have a lot of temporary and part-time help. And this would help to be able to focus year-round on the mountains of data requests that we get to cycle through those and match those up with the data requirements from the state of Minnesota, as well as really be well-versed in elections rules. We don't have anyone specifically dedicated to elections. All of the folks that are doing all of the day-to-day work of the city clerk's office are also then taking on the election when it happens. So this actually over time should really help smooth the budget out and help with 2 areas of work that in different times of year, well, all year long, the data requests come in. But in those election cycles, there's a lot that goes on, a lot of reporting requirements, training the election judges and bringing all of that work in. So that was the thought here was, again, do something more efficiently with some of the existing resources and a small increase. Although if this had been a typical election year, likely you wouldn't have seen a change in the budget. So then moving forward, this is another example of not new positions, but adjusting existing resources. So there is an accounting tech that we would recommend increasing to a senior financial analyst. So higher level work, a lot of the work that's happening in the finance department is just getting a lot more complicated. And you can see an example here that there's been 101 new rules in the Accounting Standards Board since 1984. And that's been accelerating and accelerating. The vast majority of those have happened since the year 2000. So they're constantly updating their work, updating the system, and have a need, probably a greater need than this, based on what was actually in the requests. But this was what were recommended this year. And then again, this is a new position, so you can see the reclassed positions versus new positions, some of the different costs there. So an assistant street maintenance supervisor, there are a significant number of folks that 36 equipment operators are reporting to one person. So that's your plow season, that's all of your work that happens throughout the summer months with the resurfacing, with the manhole covers, with the different work that the folks do in relationship to road maintenance, et cetera. So this is really a need based on being able to focus more on some of those strategic changes. It's a pretty large operation, $8 million annual operation. So being able to really get the kind of support that's necessary in order to stay ahead of what's coming.
Councilmember Patrick, please.
Thank you. Not just for this position here, but perhaps all of the positions that you've been bringing up that are new or enhanced and being added to, are we considering promoting from within or hiring from outside?
So that always depends on who's applying for the position. Some of those positions, we might have someone internal, but that's part of the challenge that we've actually been seeing in finance is that we've had probably double the turnover because as someone has left, someone has matriculated into their role. And so then we were preparing to hire for that position, and now we have another hiring because someone internal rose to the occasion and had that occur. So any number of these might be someone that's internal, but we do always, almost always, we typically would run a recruitment process and make sure that that we had clarity on having the best people possible with the best skill set in the position. Oftentimes, our own employees will be the folks who end up clearly showing that they are the person that's the best candidate. But sometimes we don't have folks that want to. Some people are really happy in the jobs that they're in, and they don't have a desire to either do some specific part of the new job that they don't enjoy, or they maybe have family situation or something of that nature. So I would say all of those are possible. We won't know until we go through a recruitment process.
Thank you.
Mayor Norton.
Yeah, just quickly, I'm a little sticker shock by some of the amounts here. And so I'm wondering, is this entire packages, including health benefits and whatever, it's not just salary?
Yes, it's total compensation. And so we assume these at family rates of health insurance, but we again don't know until someone comes into the position. So we build in all of those, and there's probably a minor amount of one-time cost in some of these for like the computer and some of the startup costs for those, but that's would be a pretty small portion of the overall position. But yes, that would be the position and the total cost of pension, all of the other FICA, et cetera. So that's everything.
So if I could just follow up, as I'm looking at this, I mean, it's the one, I'm just picking on one because it's a little higher than I would have expected for an assistant supervisor. So if we have, I think to Councilmember Kirkpatrick's, if we have someone internally that would go, I could understand maybe an increase, but if we're hiring someone new from outside. So is there flexibility in this range, or are these just best guesstimates, or is the rate set?
I believe that we budget these at the third step or second step. We actually budgeted at the fourth or the fifth step. Part of that is because when we're recruiting, especially if someone has years of service somewhere else, they typically don't start at a first step. So if somebody had worked for 10 years as an equipment operator and 5 years and as an assistant street maintenance person somewhere else, like they would typically not be coming in at the very beginning of your wage scale.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then just to follow up on Mayor Norton's question, can you kind of ballpark a percentage for us of what might be the salary portion, what might be the health benefits package portion, and then of course, the IT setup, just the infrastructure for this particular employee? Is that even possible to do?
I believe it's like 60-40, but
Okay,
there's a significant amount that
Okay.
comes in on that. And it changes if they're family or not family on health insurance, which can change throughout their service with the city. But also the pension cost and some of the costs that the city pays for FICA, Social Security, things of that nature.
okay, thank you so much.
And so another one here is the equipment operator. And so this was what I had explained in some of the beginning slides last time. So it's an equipment operator to traffic operations, but right now there is a position in the street maintenance division that basically gets shared between street maintenance and traffic operations. And as the lane miles of the city are growing and some of the expectations, what we're looking at here would be to fully staff that traffic operations, but that also means that there's additional capacity for the street maintenance crews to be able to do that year-round work, whether that's the summer street maintenance or the winter dig out.
Councilmember Dennis, please.
Well, thank you. Yes, so we're a growing city, so I imagine we do need to hire more staff to make sure services are fulfilled. Will this lessen being reliant on the consultants. I know there's so many issues with the high amount of money we're paying for consultants, the high amount for like the bidding process or the maybe issues with competitive bidding. If we start hiring all these positions, I'm talking about not just the ones you've talked about, but will that lessen the need for the city to hire more consultants in the future?
Councilmember Dennis, good question. It really depends on the work that needs to get done that year. So there's some very specialized things. So I'd say there's contractual services that are definitely related to getting the work done in Public Works. So certain aspects of the mill and overlay process, city teammates do, and certain aspects of the mill and overlay process, we contract with the contractor to do. They provide the material for a pavement. So they provide all of the asphalt. They also have, I don't know how, maybe $750,000, maybe $1 million worth of equipment that they bring on site to do the actual overlay process. So the example here in Public Works would, I guess someone could call that a consultant, but I would say that's contractual services from the private sector to be able to most effectively do that work. Otherwise, we'd also have to carry all of that cost of equipment. The people would probably be small in comparison to the cost of equipment in different areas here. Again, it really depends on the work. If we needed to hire somebody that was very specially trained in something to do consulting work, we always look at what makes the most sense. Typically, consultants are related to capital projects. And very specific work that has to happen related to some sort of drainage review or some kind of additional oversight of some specific unique qualification. Another good example of where it makes a lot of sense to use a consultant is the airport work. We have to meet a lot of FAA requirements. And so we have very specialized consultants at the airport that help to make sure that we're moving through all of that work that's federally funded in a way that makes sense. To hire that in-house, you'd basically need like a whole new department. So we always are trying to look at what makes the most sense. And for work that's finite, there is a lot of times that it makes sense to utilize a consultant rather than build a whole new piece of our operation. So this one is one of those one-time expenses that will likely not, it will have a smaller amount that gets reserved into the future if approved. But we have had a lot of challenges with the stage at the Down by the Riverside concert series being able to be certified in a way that artists will agree to play there in their contract. So we had actually rented a stage this year. The existing showmobile is actually about 21 years old, which is getting fairly old for a bit of a complex piece of equipment. So the suggestion here would be to purchase, this would be a larger model that would meet the necessary specifications for the type of artists that we have it Down by the Riverside, as well as out at a lot of different events. So as you can see, the cost to rent that stage is about $50,000 for the concert season. So this is one that I wouldn't say it would pay for itself, but they also have a lot of other increasing costs in the entertainment sector for between artists to insurance to just the cost of labor to be able to put the show on. Most of that is contractual labor to be able to meet the pretty small civic center budget. So the alternative to this would be continuing to invest in the stage or look at some other kind of capital investment in order to get a different kind of rated stage. And the major issue with that is wind. So typically, if we ever cancel a show, it's because it's not necessarily that it's raining. Lightning and wind are the major issues, and that's being able to assure safety and meet the riders on those contracts for the artists. So that's why this came forward, is because there's just this ongoing, one way or the other, there's an ongoing cost related to doing this if we continue with that. And that's also a part of the reason that we went from 6 to 5 Down by the Riversides this year, is to be able to meet budget with some of those increasing costs of service.
Mr. King.
Yeah, again, I think you pointed it out, but most things in the decision packets are operational things that go on. This is more of a capital item. But then when it gets put in, it seems to be part of the base budget. Are there controls we have in place so that that's not reoccurring when it's not reoccurring?
Our control is Rachel. Actually, the finance department does a great job of making sure that if something is one time, it only ends up in there one time. So you'll recall that actually the 2025 anticipated levy is lower. It's a lower increase. That's because anything that was a one-time cost comes out and it only carries any like carrying costs. So we would want to reserve dollars for the stage to into the equipment revolving fund and hopefully be able to fund it there in the future.
And then if I went through the flip book and saw this, would we have the rental expenses that we were gonna pay will be out of there? It'll be a smaller budget, or how does that wash?
Right now, it would still be in the budget because we don't know if, like,
Okay.
I don't know how long it's gonna take to get this delivered.
Okay.
A. Typically, this is kind of like a bus. Like if you order it, you might be 12 or 18 months out before you actually get delivery of the vehicle. And I would say, I guess this is more of equipment. So it's in there. I would say that there's also other adjustments that had to be made this year that it was a hard budget based on the increasing costs of labor and artists and what they're requiring in some of their contracts. So it could be a future discussion item.
Okay, I'm just trying to think of how I know we say we have staff watches this and keeps track of it, but it's, when we approve it, to me, it's,
I guess I would also say it's helping to absorb the fact that we used to have, I'll just say, there used to be a fair amount of revenue budgeted in civic music, which is free events, most of them, other than some of the smaller indoor concerts. So we tried to right size this year because typically it was showing that there would be like $100,000 of revenue for what is mostly a free concert series.
Yeah.
And maybe
Not
just-
answering this well enough.
No, but maybe just one point of clarification so you can see this, if you ever want to look back on these individually, in the back of the budget book, you have the decision packages. And then within there, there'll be a parentheses that says one-time costs. So those one-time costs are backed out and you can just cross-reference all of these decision packages, but in this particular case, it is one time in the book.
yep. Yeah, I am looking for that processes in place to make that happen, but also when that decision is made or it's funded, that we do have that corresponding savings come out too.
Correct. And I would just say that the 2025 budget year, it may not be it may not be the whole $50,000 that's saved if there's other increases in the budget because of continuing increasing costs of other parts of their budget. It's just not a one-to-one when 2025 also may have had other increasing costs for things that we are seeing increases on, like generator rental, like
Sure.
utilization of contractual services to be able to set up and tear down the show. All of those different things. So the budget probably won't be $50,000 less, even if we saved whatever the difference is in the increase of personnel costs, et cetera, for 2025 and this number.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense, but at the same time, we have to have some sort of discipline that says if we're gonna fund these things, they do have offsetting things and we're doing it at a budget level. I realize there's other things changing, but
Right.
I'd rather not be a part of a system that says, but that's something different. I mean, I wanted to have the thing that says if we had planned on renting a stage for next summer and we don't have to.
We can do that between now and the final budget.
Yeah,
and
what I'm looking for is just that the thing is in place that'll happen. It
it's in-
sounds like,
It's in place. Yeah,
Okay.
that's part of how we look at all of the baseline adjustments.
okay, thanks.
So then there's this joint facility staffing. So we went to a joint facilities model last year, which has been helpful, but also really enlightened us on some things that maybe we could do more effectively. This is an example of where some contractual services and other ways that we've been providing service, especially in the Skyways, has maybe not been the most effective way of getting work done. And so even when you have a contract, you have to be managing the contract. So what this would do, and you can get, again, you can see that this is like utilizing different line items in different ways, cutting various line items, bringing this all together. And the net change is this $59,000 for a custodian to be able to better service the facilities, in particular, some of that downtown Skyway and other downtown areas that would be better served in this way than with a contract that we currently fund. And of course, with that comes a vehicle. There were a number of vehicles that were requested here, but we suggested that they could jointly utilize a vehicle and not have separate vehicles. So this is really about scheduling and tracking. But in order to be able to get this work done, it was important to be able to have the necessary equipment for staff that goes around the city to be able to do this work. So the recommendation was to fund one joint facilities vehicle and to utilize other resources for the other part of this request that didn't get recommended. So you might be asking yourself, why is this not coming from the vehicle maintenance or the vehicle and equipment revolving fund? Because there's not enough money in the vehicle equipment and revolving fund to fund new equipment. Those are one-time asks, and then the ongoing depreciation is budgeted in the annual budget in order to build up in the future for a replacement. And so then we have the increased funding for digital ebooks. That came up a couple of times when you were having your joint meeting at the library. There was a larger amount requested, but this was the recommended in the budget to be able to make some progress on the online collection that is seeing sort of unprecedented amounts of requests. And as you might recall, the number of access points you have to those online books will sort of indicate how long the wait is for somebody to wait in order to be able to access the material that they have on hold. So this is attempting to get more people to the type of book that they're looking for that's an ebook more quickly so that they have less hold time available.
Question? Yeah. I see Karen's back there, so maybe a question she'll want to answer, but you may know the answer too. So, as we increase, and I recall this discussion, I was just shocked by the amount of increase that's happening with the digital books, but are we seeing a decrease use then in manual books, and are we shifting funds that way, or are we just seeing increases and keeping everything else steady? So I'm just.
That was one of the thoughts I had for recommending a slightly less amount that then was requested, but maybe it would be better for Director Lemke to answer that.
So we are seeing an increase in our digital ebooks for adults and adult fiction in particular. We are seeing a remarkable increase in the number of books requested for children and the book usage for children. Yay, kids. So we're in both our physical and our digital, it's challenging for us to keep up on both of those. But primarily for our adults, we're seeing an increase. We are also recognizing that we're seeing this return back to the physical library. So we've been watching that and how that breakdown continues to shake out. Pre-pandemic, about 72 to 75% of our book usage was physical. That went close to 50-50 during the pandemic at the height. This last year, so in 2022, it was back up to about 63%. So we're seeing a return, and it's unknown what the future holds in the end. But overall, we have the highest collection use ever last year. We're on track to beat that this year.
And so I just guess would request and assume that you are going to continue to watch that and balance purchases based on the community's interest. moving ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
That might be a good segue to the next slide that perhaps Ms. Lemke could continue to talk about. This is the levy portion of, and this is going to sound like a lot, but these are specialized studies that happen. This is really focused on the existing library footprint and understanding how they might better utilize that footprint, how they might rearrange, like shuffle on the inside to get more access, et cetera, but might be helpful if Director Lemke talked a little bit about that. Do you mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of taking a play out of my colleague Paul and Parks years ago did a very comprehensive study, which is something that the library has not done in the same way, looking at how to provide services moving forward and really how customers will be accessing the library moving forward. We have not made this type of significant investment in a significant study to identify how we can best serve the community, not just now, but 20 years from now, so that we make sure that whether it's changing the space and reconfiguring how folks are accessing the materials, whether it's making greater investment in outreach or making greater investment in digital needs. So again, this is a split request. So the library is contributing a portion and asking to have that split shift with council, much like was done years ago with Parks.
And then the next item, much smaller. So again, they run the gamut of size, these decision package requests. So this would get us significantly more ability to partner with our neighbors for more trees for that. So you can see that typically it's been about 35,000. So adding the 11,550 would be doesn't sound like a lot of money, but based on what had been contributed in the past, it's a fairly significant increase in what could be accomplished with that partnership. And then here you see some support for the police department. You might recall there were some significant baseline adjustments as well for existing personnel. So this would fund the new position for school resource officer. I believe that would be the 6th school resource officer. And so this is the amount that would come to the levy. There is offsetting dollars that come from the school district for the bulk of the cost of the position. And this is the partnership. It does help to relieve resources from the rest of the system. If we have resources within the schools, they can build those relationships and really better respond and not take an officer off the street unless there's like some major incident that's occurring where they need to have someone assist them with something. So this is something that you saw a contract for earlier this year, and there was some cost savings able to be applied to that in the current fiscal year. And this would be putting that in the baseline budget to continue that partnership with the school district at 6 school resource officers.
With the recent legislative action that has put restraints on what police departments or SROs can do within schools, is that a discussion with the Rochester Police Department and what this may or may not mean for their participation?
It is, I would say, a testament to our officers, and I believe Chief Franklin is online, so this is your cue to get unmuted and be prepared in case you weren't paying a lot of attention online. I know you probably were, but I can't see you, so I'm not sure. They have a great relationship with the school district, so perhaps Chief Franklin can talk more about that, but I think just shout out to our SROs who remain very committed to this work.
Council members, thank you very much. City Administrator, thank you. Apologize for my remote here, but yeah, that's correct. We've been actively working through those issues. I'm part of the board of directors for the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association as well. The Chiefs Association met with Attorney General Ellison to get a ruling in reference to kind of the reasonableness of use of force, and working through that. I've been in constant contact with Superintendent Kent Pickel. We're at a point in this kind of discussions, if you will, where we have some questions answered, a few that are unanswered, but we feel that we can navigate effectively through the unanswered questions due to the fact that we had the reasonableness question answered up front by Attorney General Ellison. So based on that, there's a substantial amount of work that's been done behind the scenes. I provided a kind of a memo synopsis to the mayor and city administrator Zelms probably a week ago. I'm more than happy to forward that to council for your review as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Wall. I was fortunate enough to hear Dr. Pickel today on the radio, and he was very supportive of the officers at the school. He had pointed out that the holds that were being barred have not been used in the last 2 years in our school district, and he's very appreciative of the officers. And he made a point to say that they are not there for discipline; they're there to prevent things to happen. So I was very happy to hear that today.
Mayor.
So I'm going to throw this in just because I don't know where else to throw it in the discussion. But I want to put this out here, and I've talked to administration today about, you know, something I've been talking with the chief about based on the calls that I get in my office. And I know the emails and calls that you guys get too, which is that we have kind of had an increase, as many cities had during the pandemic, of speeding and traffic issues. And I know there was a request that came through this year for some a traffic team, because we really don't have that in our department. And so I was disappointed that it wasn't in, but do understand that we're going to be, and Administrator Zelms can talk about a little bit about what she's doing if she likes, but, you know, looking at evaluating the department and seeing you know, are our resources in the right place? And is there a way, do we need to add more officers? Is there a way to redeploy them? But I guess I personally feel like traffic has become a more and a growing problematic issue over the last few years, and really had hoped we'd be able to add some. And, you know, this maybe isn't the year for it, but I kind of want to put that on your radar as something I really think we're going to need to address. And perhaps Administrator Zoms wants to say more about that.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. I can also maybe start off with a little bit of the thought process. We did add some resource for the public work side of traffic, neighborhood traffic management, and a lot of those neighborhoods is a lot of where we get some of those requests from. So one thought is that just has come online. And so what are some of the traction and ability that we can make in some of the physical improvements by having more resource to be able to go and analyze those and work with the neighborhoods to make improvements. But also there's significant investment in the police department in this budget. I think what it raises is the point that anything that you saw in a requested decision package that wasn't recommended doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. I think I said before, there were a lot of different things here that this was a difficult recommendation to make. But I think that it would be beneficial to you is to take a look at those and know that all of those things are likely coming in some way, shape, or form over the next few years if we want to continue to stay ahead of the curve. But you'll see on a future slide some conversation, and we'll bring a more fleshed out version of that to you for how to sort of accelerate some phase one funding of the one-time public safety funding that came from the legislature, and inclusive of that, looking at an operational review for police and fire, to validate the fire plan, right? So you've seen sort of a step there. And also to make sure that we have a good understanding and playbook for what are some of those greatest needs, where are the gaps, where is there some available time, and if there isn't any, we can accelerate some of those conversations, and you can be prepared for the magnitude of costs that might be associated with some of those. I did also build in a little bit of capacity in 2025 so that if we, in some of those accelerated plans are approved and we see that those are successful and they need to be built into the ongoing budget, that you have a little bit of room without adjusting the levy in 2025. If that isn't the case, then it would be an opportunity to have different discussions up to and including reducing the levy in 2025. But there's just a lot of change that happened at the legislature. There's also a lot of need across all of the departments. And so my goal over time is to have that kind of plan for all of the departments. Most of our enterprise funds have that because they base all of their planning on rate studies. But we don't necessarily have as much of that for the various different types of services that, I'll use the word, are competing for tax levy across a very large part of our operation: police, fire, public works, parks, and library.
So basically, you're just saying you balance everything out from request.
I mean, I tried to be reasonable. I know that it's something that's important to the community, but I think it would be helpful to the elected officials to have a roadmap and really have a good understanding of how are we resourcing in order to get results, so it doesn't feel like in the future when I'm up here that you're spending money. Yes, of course, you need to resource things with dollars, but what are you accomplishing actually with the resources that are being dedicated to a variety of different decisions? We'll get there. We're on our way. The police public records request system. You might be familiar with this system in case you've ever received a data request, GovQA. There's a different type of data request and a different type of statutory requirement for requests that come for police records. So this is not a huge amount, but it would help them to resource and track the data requests that they get. And if you have any questions, I'm guessing the chief is just waiting to answer them. This is making progress on step one. About a little over 200,000 of this is for a position and the startup costs of a position, equipment, et cetera. Again, fully blown. That's pension. That's any related costs of the salary, and then also health insurance. And then a little over $100,000. So I guess that's the opposite. A little over 100,000 of this is for vehicles and equipment. So this person would need to be able to get around the city and respond to calls. But this would help to really validate and continue to work towards step two. Step two of the 8-step plan is in the recommended 2025 budget. So step one is the assistant chief. Step two is the captain. So to get that started and hire people, you have to have the proper operational support in order to train and operationalize steps 3 and beyond. And again, this is really related to calls for service downtown being primarily related to, well, significant number of calls for service downtown are medically related. So this would allow for reutilization of station 1 to be primarily for medical, and then repurpose the existing firefighter staffing costs to a new station up in the Northwest as you reach the 8th step. If there's any questions about that, we have a cadre of fire experts here that could answer them.
Councilmember Dennis.
All right, thank you. So I know we've talked about this before, just to, you know, if this is, like you mentioned, downtown medical related, what is the percentage again? If this has been said, I apologize for not having that in my tip of my memory, that Mayo Clinic obviously is the large hospital downtown. What is Mayo Clinic doing to pick up some of this tab for all the increased medical calls that are received?
So Councilmember Dennis, this is a good question. They operate an ambulance service that does another part of the handoff of the medical service here. So this is just the initial response, and then that's to get the person hopefully continuing to be stabilized until the ambulance system comes and takes over. And that's a cost to Mayo Clinic. That's an arm of Mayo Clinic. Also, I believe it's about 1% of our geographic size is the downtown area, and about 14% of all of our tax capacity is coming from the downtown. I would just also say the importance here isn't necessarily just the downtown service. What this actually does is be able to staff and operationalize a full fire department, a full fire station, excuse me, in the Northwest. So that would be just like any other fire station, but rather than having to have the downtown fire station and the cost of all of the firefighters and equipment, you would be able to move basically all the positions that are downtown now to that Northwest station and serve that part of the community that's having a harder time getting the calls for service in the time necessary, just based on the geographic location of the closest station. So you can't, like, you could think of this just as downtown, but we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't need the 6th station. And I don't know if Chief Perska or Deputy Chief Mulholland could provide any other context.
Yeah, this changes our entire deployment model, our historic deployment model. So it's not just the medical calls, it's the growing geography. It's the struggles we have with our command and control, existing span of control issues. It's our lack of a safety officer. This encompasses a whole host of things into one package.
Mr. Palmer.
And I appreciate the fire chief and everybody working hard to rethink how we do things and coming back with not just the same old, but I appreciate this. And I think this is a great investment for Rochester. And I again, hats off for doing it.
Yeah, just say, if and when we do the operational study, they'll probably be surprised that this is already on the mind of the fire chief. I think they're probably say the same thing about the blueprint and some of the community engagement work and real acceptance and support of the community outreach program that the police department works with.
The only other thing I could quickly add is this is a real partnership between Mayo Clinic and the Rochester Fire Department. They, like us, everybody, well, most people are struggling with the hiring pipeline. And so we're working close together to bridge these gaps. They have shortfalls, we have shortfalls, and we're working together to solve them together.
So moving on, this increased funding for equity and development support actually started as a position, but we reorganized a couple of things. And so the intent here is to be able to fund some work that will get the rest of our organization better up to speed, some templates, et cetera. This is related to some of the purchasing requirements for minority and women-owned businesses. So this is something to try to help us be able to handle some of the workload and distribute the workload through better training and templates and really helping our teammates that do distributed contracting be able to achieve the goals and the tracking in a better way. I don't think we can ever expect just one department to do that in a centralized way. But we do have folks across the organization that are doing this work and would benefit from support, as you saw in the presentation earlier this year from the study session, where Ms. Motala and some partners presented information about how we would achieve some of those goals for hiring into our capital improvement projects. Not hiring, excuse me, contracting into our capital improvement projects. And then this is, I hope, the last unfreeze that you'll ever see. If there's more unfrozens after today, mark my words, it wasn't frozen. So this is the last frozen position. Obviously, we're starting to see an uptick in our building permits. You see additional building permit revenue in the 2024 budget that is absorbing some of this. So this would be getting back to that fourth building inspector position. It is really important that we continue to meet the mark to keep permits and inspections moving as quickly as possible so that our partners in the private sector who are investing in Rochester don't have unwarranted delays in their building projects.
Councilmember Palmer.
I know the state law mandates that we can only charge what we have for expenses. So I'm assuming that the revenue that we're receiving from is going to pay for this.
Yes, it's, I believe that what it is about 25% of the overall costs. 20 or 25% of the overall.
Is it coming out
costs
of taxpayer or is it coming out of the permits?
Coming out of permits.
Shouldn't all of it come out of the permits?
You have to really, that would be an astronomically higher number. I don't know that you'd get much investment in Rochester. Maybe Deputy Administrator Steinhauser could speak to that.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question, Councilmember Palmer, that you're asking is all of the building permit revenue that we receive covering 100% of the cost from the building
Correct.
permit department?
Correct.
Oh, I thought you were talking about community development.
Yeah. So so both are correct. So from the building permitting process, that is covering 100%. However, there is subsidy for the community development department, which building permits live under.
So it's paying for more than just the building inspector. There's other parts of plan review, et cetera, that a portion of which is paid for with some of those building permit fees.
Correct.
Correct. So when we send out a weed inspector or we send out somebody else that's coming out of community development, comes out of the taxpayer dollars. But the actual person that runs out and looks at something or does the plan review, that's paid with the permit fees.
Yes.
Yes. We're on the same page.
I don't generally look at the budget that way. Apologies.
I just have a little more knowledge on that. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then a new position, again, this isn't the total cost of the position, but these get charged out to projects. So it's coming from a variety of different funding sources. But the net levy costs for an additional construction inspector, again, we have significant amount of investment happening in a lot of capital projects and also in city owner contracts. And so it's important that we're able to make sure that we are constructing things at the first time, the right way. And that is the cost of this position. It's just been difficult to have people be able to stay on top of things with the current number of folks that we have. And then EPR licenses, I'm gonna have to remember what EPR is, but it's basically electronic plan review. I'm usually talk about ERP, Enterprise Resource Program. So the electronic plan review we've actually seen a lot of value from this. You'd likely have had more positions if we didn't have the electronic plan review, but we don't have the number of licenses necessary for that holistic review from all of the different departments to do this online. So this is hopefully going to get us all the licenses we need to do that joint plan review from all the different departments that look at things and be able to do that simultaneously and be in the software and really get the full value of electronic plan review, not only to get the project out to delivery, but also so that it's less time in between review pieces for the person that's investing in that improvement. Couple of smaller things. The intent of this branded apparel cost is really to get folks into a clearer ability to have the same amount of branded apparel. This is the cost of offsetting just the logo piece of the clothing. The employee pays for the piece of clothing, and then the city absorbs the cost of the logo, which for some people is significant. It can be in like a $10 shirt could have a $10 logo on it. The cost of embroidery is pretty similar regardless. And so this would come also with a policy to make sure that there's not some places where someone's getting 10 different shirts a year and another place where an employee can only get one. Obviously, that adjusts a little bit in the departments where folks have uniform allowances. But we have found that people are really proud of being able to have their branded logo be worn. Some of them are on the dais today. It's been a unifying thing for teammates to be able to do, but not every department has the wherewithal to be able to provide as much access to this within their own budget. That's where the funding comes from. And so this is trying to equalize that.
And I have found that when I'm out at events and even neighborhood information meetings, just because you're wearing the logo, people actually come to me like I know something, and I usually have to refer them to somebody who does know something, but we have a conversation and it's very helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, Molly, excuse me.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I think the unified logo is wonderful. I mean, imagine everyone purchased, I purchased my, my, polo myself. So this $20,000 though, I feel, I mean, it's not and I want to talk about the budget in general, it's not a huge, amount, you know, compared to millions of dollars, but wouldn't it just be more logical for everyone just to pick up the tab for because some people aren't going to, you know, like I like to, you know, team spirit, you know, be part of it, but some people might not want to. And so you're kind of, I don't know, taxing, I think taxpayer dollars that the taxpayers aren't getting low boot shirts, you know, I don't know. I guess I feel like this is not needed. We should just charge people more per piece of clothing if they choose to be, or work around budgets in the departments to have the department cover equally their staff teammates apparel. But I think taxpayers shouldn't be footing the bill for clothing of the city.
So Councilmember Dennis, I just want to clarify again that this is for the logo, not for the actual piece of clothing. So even when the council purchased their polo, for example, the cost of the logo isn't included in that purchase. The cost of the logo gets picked up by the department. So the city council budget picked up the cost of the logo. There are any number of teammates that are either part-time or seasonal, who, if they get the $10 shirt and it becomes a $20 shirt, or really it's pricing them out of the ability to have the logo apparel. So we can come back with something different. This could go away if there's consensus from the city council, but this is to try to address that same issue. If it was going to come out of other city budgets, you would continue to have less parity between departments, depending on how much they have available in their budget and what they've budgeted to be able to provide the branded apparel already.
What departments have it already budgeted? You said some have.
There's a significant, I'll just say there's a significant challenge in parks based on the number of people that they have, and especially in their seasonal and part-time and the way that they hire.
Okay.
So that's a
So
challenge.
maybe instead of doing the 20,000, add a little bit more to the parks budget.
So that would be
cover.
levy. So that would be coming from the same funding source. If we're adding more to the park budget, it would still be a net levy impact.
Well, I'm just saying, when you talk about spreading the cost, people who can't afford it because they're part-time, and you're talking about, you know, parks not having that money. I just don't feel it's right to have all departments, those that can afford it, council members, people who can add just a little bit more if they care to have a shirt. So I'm not a big fan of this.
Appreciate that. And then that's something that we would put into the policy. So like the intent would be that it's not that one department's getting 10 shirts a year per person. It's that there's parity across departments. And this is the differential based on what we've seen in ordering. Apologies if I didn't explain that properly the first time.
Mr. Palmer.
I know it's a small item, but I do support it, and I think it's nice to have your employees be uniformed. And for me, for my yellow shirts, I paid for them all completely, but that's beside the point. But I think having your employees be the same, that you can see them in the park and say, he's a City of Rochester employee or she's a City of Rochester employee, I think that's important. So.
little walk behind paint machine for $20,000. You should check the picture out if you've ever seen one. Whoever invented this is a genius. But this is really, again, just to be able to stay on top of things. We have a pretty outdated, worn paint machine. So looking at replacing the paint machine, we can have employees, but if they don't have the right equipment to do the job, then the work doesn't really get done as effectively as possible. So this also would be adding this in to the equipment revolving fund for future replacement, so it doesn't come as a total cost to the net levy. I think this is the last one. Organizational health and wellness. So you heard a bit about this. This is the net levy amount. It's actually a larger dollar amount, but some of it is coming from enterprise funds. So this is significantly related to being able to institutionalize some of the work that's happening, really good work that's happening in police and fire to be able to support their health and wellness, especially in the way to avoid workers' compensation claims or being able to assure that we hopefully avoid some of those folks needing to leave because of post-traumatic stress injury and not being able to come back into the system. But what this also does is be able to take some of the existing work that's been happening on even physical fitness and wellness in police and fire and bringing that to an in-house position. There's a significant amount of funding that's already going to that contractual cost. And so being able to bring that in-house provides a lot more flexibility for when and how they can do that work. Obviously, police and fire are 24/7, some different kind of shift work that's happening in that. But hopefully be able to also increase our ability to provide similar services to the rest of our team. So there is some positions associated with this, but some of that is transitioning from a contractual paid arrangement to having that be an in-house service. And if there's any detailed additional questions, I'm certain that Mr. Parrish could answer them.
Mr. King.
Just reading this, I wasn't sure what was happening. This isn't citywide or city employee-wide. This is only for certain departments, or is this very specifically redoing how the police do it, or is it?
It's citywide, but there is a component that is for the mental health wellness. That could be, we've actually deployed that to other departments. We're really fortunate to be already have that in place for police and fire and be able to bring that after a critical incident that impacted our public works employees. So it is more specifically geared towards that sort of constant reoccurring exposure that police and fire have to some very difficult situations, but we have utilized it for other employees, and not just police and fire, always responding to the calls for service, depending on what they are. There's also a component of this that's paid for with health insurance. So maybe Aaron Parrish, Deputy Administrator Parrish, could provide a little more clarity.
Yeah, it really is both. I mean, there's a lot of sub-programs within this overall initiative happening here. And so some of it really is replicating things we're doing today that we did on a pilot basis and providing permanent funding. So the chaplaincy program is a great example of that. Right now, that's principally for police and fire, but we've seen success when we have other critical incidents within the city. And all of our teammates, on right, wrong, or indifferent, do get exposed to some very serious things at times. And we've seen that chaplaincy program be beneficial to non-public safety employees. So it gives permanent funding to public safety. It does give a permanent funding to an organizational wellness specialist that would provide services for everybody. And we are self-insured for work comp. We are self-insured for health insurance. And so the goal here, and it's hard to quantify, is to reduce expenses in those areas. And also providing some biometric screening while folks are at work. So instead of us hoping that folks go and take advantage of the opportunity to get their annual screens and different blood markers and other types of panels done, this provides the opportunity to do some of that in-house. And there's lots of great stories for organizations that have implemented that, of something caught that someone really wasn't aware of. And so we're really excited about it. As Allison said, some of it is replacing funding for our tactical fitness that's happening right now on a contracted basis. We expect that will have some incremental organizational benefits, but I'd also just want to emphasize really here too, there's some significant law changes that happened with this last session, and we're obligated to provide this type of programming. Thank you. We're obligated to provide this type of programming through the law, either through an EAP or other wellness programs that we develop. And our answer to that legislative requirement is to adopt a wellness program like this.
Thank you.
Ms. Dennis.
I'm maybe it's other people are understanding this, I'm still kind of wrapping my mind. So we have insurance, we have EAP. I know back in March, I had to utilize EAP quite extensively from some events that had happened on city council. So I definitely know that it's a very important thing to have mental health services for especially toxic work environments. However, I do feel that this being such a huge amount of money, golly, doesn't other companies do, I mean, have we looked at other ways of, costs or, I don't know, like, I guess I'm just not wrapping my mind around about, we have a wonderful program. What I've seen so far with EAP has been phenomenal. You call up and say, I need to go see someone and it's covered. And then you go, I have another problem, it's covered, and just, constantly have, help with, um, you know, dealing with problems. And I rode along. Hopefully we'll do it very soon again with the police department, with the officers who've talked about the wonderful program that they've experienced. So I guess for this kind of money for taxpayers, what is the difference? I'm just wrapping my head about what we have now and the coverage. Then is this to cover the chaplain, to cover, I don't know. I think the money can be better. And I'm from a bystander's point of view, I guess I'm not deep into this, better spent maybe doing different training, more connecting, working on our, our relationships, and maybe more DEI training for people who have different needs, or whatever the situation may be. Is this, I guess, have other options been looked at to, surveys done to see if this is really what employees need? Because other companies maybe have their employees cover certain costs instead of just picking up the bill.
Certainly, Councilmember Dennis, just to get into a little bit deeper of what this is. So currently, the cost of the chaplaincy program, which I believe collectively is close to $100,000, was one-time funding that was coming from the training budgets of the police and fire department. So this means that their training budgets, and a lot of that is statutorily required, will not need to carry this, and this will be something that is carried, and it's been proven out so far in our work that this is successful. We've seen a decrease in the number of claims filed for post-traumatic stress disorder. This is also something that the League of Minnesota Cities is studying very closely, and the type of wellness and assistance that police and firefighters traditionally will seek out is typically not the EAP program, although it is confidential, especially in smaller markets like Rochester and some other outstate. It is difficult for, it's just been a challenge, and this is true across the country. It does require some unique, a unique approach in order to really get uptake in police and fire department. They're not comfortable generally talking about vulnerabilities. And so it's something that's really important that is hopefully going to prevent losing people to post-traumatic stress disorder or having negative outcomes in the community. So that's a key component of this. There's also physical fitness training that we've been funding contractually, and that has been increasing year over year over year in police and fire. And that's to reduce some of the repetitive movement issues, make sure they're lifting appropriately, making sure that they are as healthy as possible so that we avoid workplace injuries that we pay the cost for. If there's a workplace injury, that's not coming from their health insurance. We also have lost time and then overtime. So that is something that would be helped by having the organizational wellness coordinator. We do this actually across the city. So if you've ever been to Public Works, they have a bunch, they actually every morning, I would just credit the HR department for starting this out. They do stretching. They do like 15 minutes of getting ready for their day to make sure that they can be as healthy as possible to avoid an injury. And it's something they take very seriously as well. This also happens in the Parks Department. We have a lot of field employees across our organization, wastewater, water, electric, utility. And this would help to augment what is happening sometimes as part of someone's job, and really making sure that this is seen across the organization as something we support. It's also something that we've seen in some of our employee surveying, that people care about this, and that it's important to them that we continue to make strides in our organizational health and wellness for the workplace that they work in, and sometimes spend more time in than they do with their families. So it's just another layer. The EAP program is something that is part of the overall cost of health insurance, and the employee does absorb a significant portion of the employee cost for their health insurance.
I'm a huge fan of anything we do to help mental health and help our society become more healthy. I feel maybe trying something first, like maybe more breaks or more, something where we can
So those are
connect them.
contractually obligated. So I
Well,
think that we have to think about also that the city is has 19 bargaining units. And so breaks and things of that nature are typically part of what's in their contract. So there's things that we aren't always able to do. And if you're a police or firefighter, for example, or if you're a plow driver, you get your breaks when it stops snowing. Or you get your breaks when sometimes a 10-hour shift turns into 18-hour shift because you're addressing a critical need in the organization. So it's most of our employees are not 9 to 5 employees. They're working a variety of different shifts under different conditions. And so what might work at an office isn't the same type of work that's going to work for folks that are out in the field on their own. And we have been piloting this. We piloted it in the police and fire department. And so that is part of why it's coming to you as a recommendation. The goal is also to reduce the overall costs to our workers' compensation and health insurance as we move forward. So the goal would be to do preventative care so that you don't end up picking that up in rate increases in the future.
I think just maybe one more why this is important. We're in a very dynamic recruitment environment, particularly for these public safety sensitive positions, but overall, right? I mean, we're just in a different period of, recruitment. It used to be we had many options in selection processes, and it's really not the case anymore. But particularly for police officer recruitment, they're wanting to know what kind of programs you have available to help them be successful with the many challenges that they're going to see. And these are the kinds of things that they're expecting. They're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing them. And this is really goes a long way in terms of our recruitment efforts and being able to market that to potential people that are going to serve the community.
Mr. Palmer.
I was very supportive of the pilot and I'm very supportive of this program. I think it's a great investment in our employees and I'm glad we're moving ahead with it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Mr. Palmer said. I really appreciate our first responders and thank you for the work that you do every day, keeping our community safe. Our society is changing significantly, especially in the last 10 years, and I anticipate it to continue to do so. And this, I guess, progressive or proactive approach, although I don't like the price tag, I think is going to be hugely valuable. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Bransford.
Yeah, I would echo the sentiment. This is very important. I understand mental health is very important and, reducing toxic work environments, I think is on each of us to do ourselves. I don't necessarily think we need mental health training to do that, but I'm glad that Ms. Dennis was able to take that training and, put it to good use.
Thank you. So we talked a little bit about the debt service. We just wanted to provide you a full roll-up. It did not include the Rochester Public Utilities. What this is really showing you is that the GO debt, so the debt that's supported and paid for by the tax levy, is very small in comparison to your total debt profile. You can see that there is an increase shown in 2026. That's a decision for the future. But that would be if you finance the entire component of the city's share of the state. We've got the state bonding request for the parks maintenance facility. That is a slightly less than half of the cost of moving that facility. So this shows in 2026 on that top line what it would be carrying in the debt service if that was all financed. We had shown you a slide that showed there was a couple other decision points to be made there on how to fund. So we did want to put the largest amount in so that if you make that future decision, you have the full picture of what that would look like. I also think it's helpful to look at the GO debt that's not supported by tax. So why would we call it GO debt if it's not supported by tax? That is something in the financing world that we do where we fully anticipate that the revenue source will pay for that debt, but backing it with the full faith and credit of the city gets you a much better interest rate on that. So you pay much less for that project over time. And you can also see what we call laddering your financing. So in 2026, on that second line, you see that it goes from about 26 million, and there's a balloon payment there, to 14 million. And then in 2027, it goes down to 6 million. We do anticipate that that will actually be more level in that $14 million range because of that large wastewater improvement that we're planning for and starting to invest in. But that's how you can keep your rates fairly reasonable with small increases for things like your wastewater fee, because we plan in those debt schedules and those improvements in a way where when the next large investment comes, it's leveling off what those payments are. So when we talk about laddering debt, that's what we're talking about. And then the RPU revenue supported, you can see that what the amount has been in 2024 and 2025. And then there's some anticipated new financing related to the transmission of electricity in the 2030 plan.
Administrator Zones, we were talking earlier, and I believe you referenced a mistake that was made in the packet that was sent out. And so that anybody who's looking at this online and following the presentation, that 2025 not supported by tax is overstated by about $10 million in what the public might be looking at and what you have updated.
Correct. So we made the correction on this slide. Thank you for pointing that out.
I have a question just on the, and I don't know if there's a straightforward answer. I really appreciate like the detail here, the splitting out what's levy supported versus enterprise. That's helpful in the RPU. But when I go back to the bigger summary showing what our debt services plan is in the 2024 budget, I think it's 16 point some million. And I'm trying to look at this page and say, well, I'm going back to last week's.
The final budget will have these numbers in it. That's what that's showing.
Well, tell me, just so I understand, it'll have like the 37.9 million, or which number would it have?
Depends on if it's inclusive of RPU or not inclusive of RPU, but what we found is that RPU was not included that number, and so, and we also needed to we need to update it. So in the scramble to get the budget book together, that
Okay.
number does not match this number.
All right.
But in actual financial system, it does match. It's
Okay.
just that in the graphic that we pulled together, it doesn't match this number. So this is the correct information that will get picked up in the final budget book. In the graphic, there's the 4-square graphic I think you're referencing.
Yes. Yep.
That will get corrected with the actual numbers.
Okay. And the way that it would be both of the, it would be both the levy supported and the enterprise supported and the RPU number.
Most likely, but we still need to have that conversation. I mean, these are the numbers that are getting paid for. I just also need to make sure it's not getting picked up somehow in the RPU side of
Right.
where that graphic is. So we need to double check the graphic and make sure that all of the different quadrants add up to the total dollar amount.
Okay. And again, it probably isn't that significant. The key point numbers are on this page is what we plan to pay 4 point some million out of levy in 2024. And that's really driven by just past decisions of the Public Works building, putting it on debt, and then also doing the DSIS and basically funding them that way. Those are the two major drivers.
Those are the major drivers. And there was a period of time where they used equipment certificates to finance large equipment purchase. But I would also point out that a little over $4 million for this size of city is very low amount of debt to be carried by your tax levy. I think I referenced another community to our west that is maybe a third of our size, and their annual geo debt profile is about $10 million. Not saying we should get there, but this is a very low amount. This is where I could turn over to my friend Tim McCullough
Thank you.
and Peter Hogan. Sorry, I didn't see Peter.
Thank you, Administrator Zelms. I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. Good evening, Council. My name is Tim McCullough. I'm new in the seat at the Rochester Public Utilities as General Manager. Mark retired here last Wednesday, and I am on week 5 at the helm of Rochester Public Utilities. So appreciate the welcome I've received from everyone. Didn't intend to go into depth on this or the next slide. These are really just overview slides of the information that Allison covered, Administrator Zelms covered last week. So if there's any ongoing questions, There's one point that I'd like to make in the conversation last week. There was a reference to the AMI project a couple times. That is a foundational technology that we're moving forward with that was approved by the RPU board to include in the multi-year capital budget, which you are seeing as a draft budget in front of you. And the A in AMI stands for advanced. We have been in the world of AMR for greater than 10 years, where we would do drive-by meter reads throughout the whole community. This next version of technology has multiple value streams, but it is a advanced metering system that brings all the reads in over a communication network and has a lot of other technologies included with it that sets us up for the future. Be happy to talk about any more of that if you have questions, but I'll be silent and see if there's any questions for me.
There's also an electric utility slide. Okay. Thank you for the grace. I apparently was living in the world of AMR being AMI. Now I know that it is the future. So thank you for the assist. Appreciate it. And thank you to Peter Hogan for helping us with the debt correction on that slide. Really appreciate the partnership there. There was a question last week also about capital improvement projects budgeted versus expenditures. The whole budget rarely matches exactly what we budget because it's the plan that we use in order to resource and know where our work should be focused. And then if we can get in under budget, we always do. But projects that are budgeted for one year, they might carry over into year two. Sometimes they're planned to be multi-year projects where we're doing the design in one year and we're doing the construction in another year. And sometimes depending on how complex the project is, it might actually require a significant amount of design, or with the funding sources, there might be multiple years of planning and design and then multiple years of construction. So if it's budgeted in a year and it's delayed to a later year, it carries forward with that same project budget. We also will do budget adjustments every year in the middle of in mid-year, and you did that last week for some capital project transfers. So when a project is complete and it's closed out, if there's remaining dollars in that project account, then it will roll over into other available capital projects. If additional funds are needed, we would go back to the city council. We hope that's rare, but sometimes we will see change orders on a project in order to be able to finish them. There was a change order that was approved last week related to some additional storm drain work that ended up happening on the sidewalk project for this year. So we went back to council to address that and had existing funding sources to be able to absorb that. And then if it's funded in future years, then I have to actually read this. I forgot what the slide said before reading it. Multiple resources for certain types of projects. So a major road reconstruction will have stormwater, wastewater, water, and sometimes electric utility, as well as the streets component. So oftentimes you'll see a fairly small amount of tax levy associated with those. Again, we have about $8.5 million of tax levy going towards capital improvement projects. So obviously there's a lot of things that happen under the ground that you don't see when there's a project coming forward that has above ground work that people are used to seeing, like the street that they drive on. But there's a significant cost. And when we do those reconstructions, we try really hard to coordinate together to make sure that all those funding sources come back. But if a part of the project that's related to drainage comes in under budget, that part would be returned to drainage in order to be able to continue to invest in that system. This is the fun of fund accounting, and part of why our teammates in finance need a little bit extra support in order to make sure that all the funds stay in the right place. Then just wanted to point out, we are still in the preliminary budget, but you can see that the preliminary budget for Rochester Public Utilities for their payment in lieu of taxes is a little bit lower than what the recommended budget is. So there may be a little bit of room here between now and December, depending on how everything shakes out, to have a little bit of additional capacity. However, there's a reason we didn't put an increase in the budget. There's a couple things that we need to be prepared for in 2025 or 2024 and 2025. And those are, I guess, should have been at the top of this slide in order for a smooth transition, but we'll go to the bottom of the slide, adjusting for impacts of the 2023 legislative session. In addition to some of the requirements that Deputy Administrator Parrish mentioned about having a wellness program, there is a little thing called Earned Safe and Sick Time coming our way that we're not exactly sure what the impact will be. There's a significant additional amount of leave that will be needing to figure out how to apply. And it could create overtime, it could create some needs for different seasonals and other positions to transition from seasonal or otherwise to full-time or part-time. So I think that will be important capacity to retain in order to address whatever as we learn more about how this will apply, to make sure that it's properly funded in the budget. Obviously, the different utilities will pick up their share, and the non-levy funded supported services. But that's a concern that's hanging out there. There's a couple of other things that came that I don't think we know fully the impact of yet, that may create some pressures on the police department. And then obviously, just going back up to the top, we have some decisions to make either now or in 2025 about a final approach for the park maintenance facility. So within what is projected in the budget, you have room for that decision. We have the Destination Medical Center CIP that will be coming to you on October 2nd. Vehicle maintenance fund stabilization, those are conversations incrementally over time that we should be having in order to both stabilize the existing fund, to be able to support what has been a significant increase in costs per vehicle, as well as have the conversation about future investments in additional greening or greening of the fleet, which parts of that will mean not just fleet, but if there's more electrification, making sure facilities actually have the power grid and the ability to support that. Again, just mentioned the RPU pilot amounts. And then this last bullet, public safety aid one-time funding. So we have been meeting with Chief Franklin and Chief Kurska administration, as well as Mayor Norton, just to talk through. We did have one-time funding come from the state. And I say one-time over and over because it means it's not continuous source of funding. So we need to be thoughtful about how to utilize that either as pilot or other one-time costs. And so we'll be coming to you with the proposed phase 1 and phase 2 so that there can be some relief now and ability to invest in some things, including that operational analysis that we're working together on a scope of work for. And then being able to be prepared better prepared for what phase 2 funding might look like, and always understanding what any ongoing costs might be. If there's success in that, I think it's really important to be able to make sure that you're aware throughout the time that might be coming as a 2025 ask to continue providing that programming. I think this is the process we've been going through. We are in August. We do have September 11th slated as any additional conversation that you need to have on the budget, if there is any. If nothing else, I think we would be coming to you to just talk through a little bit what that phase 1, phase 2 concept is for that one-time public safety funding. And then the preliminary levy approval is scheduled for September 18th. Again, that is a date where the levy can remain the same or go down. The levy cannot increase after that date. I guess I shouldn't land on the appendix.
Any questions on the budget? We have yet opportunity in September. Mr. Keen.
Yeah, again, I appreciate going like the deeper dive into some of these things. I did take, some different notes going through it, but they weren't questions as much as clarifications, and I just didn't end up doing it. One thing I was looking for a little more, and I know it's in your appendix, is some stuff on the CIP and some of the major drivers for that. We're gonna, that's just, I know there's the number of projects, categories, dollar amounts.
We can go to the appendix for that. And
Again, I'm not, actually, it wasn't really the stuff I needed. I went through that, but it's not the sources and the uses, what the individual projects are. It just had the categories.
we might be able to pop over to the flipping book if you want.
Well,
Yeah, and I guess, President, members of council, mayor, our intent on the CIP was we presented that in June, and I guess if you want more, we can certainly, do that. I think our intent was, we were pretty final with where the CIP was at when we presented it in June. But if there's anything you want elaboration on, or if you want an additional summary, we're certainly happy to, present that we could do that on the 11th as well, but our intent was to try to front load that into the process, so that was kind of behind us and then move forward, but happy to re-engage it if you think it's helpful.
No, I guess I'm not looking for that level of detail, that council thing. What I was looking for, and I thought I was requesting, is I do want to have a feel for the amount that we're funding through levy into capital things. I want to kind of watch where that money goes. One of the things that I say is that our public transportation isn't really funded through levy, but I worry that sometimes it is through capital. I know we do a little bit of levy funding to the airport, but not much. I think it's still in the 500K range.
About 580,000. It's for utilities and some
Yep.
basic operations of a $6 million operation.
What I'm looking for, and I think I can get it out of the flip book when it's more settled, is to make sure I'm not misleading anyone that we're funneling a bunch of other money through capital to those things. That's what I'm watching out for, and I want to be aware if that's happening.
Yeah, and I think there's a pretty easy answer to that. I mean, generally, of the $100+ million CIP, about 8 million of that is general fund supported or levy supported, plus a little bit of LGA. We can remember we did that, slight adjustment this year. The lion's share of that goes into public works projects, standard annual allocations for mill and overlay, some level for street reconstruction, and then, variety of other sort of more one-time, projects. But we do try to be pretty level with that. But again, the core of it really isn't that. Now, this year we have a couple of nuances again. We're proposing some one-time funding for the ERP system and the rec center roof replacement. But generally speaking, we can provide you with the sources and uses and where that levy is going pretty easily.
Okay. And just again, I went back to the policy considerations, the 3 questions. Again, I'm trying to get comfortable with a 9-point-some% increase, but I think that what I've come down to is the majority of it is driven by personnel costs and that sort of upfront question of, do we want to provide the same services year over year? And then are we investing in some of these strategic areas? And based on that, I'm supporting what we're doing right now. As far as recommendations, again, I'll always have my different questions, and some of the things I saw today, I know when we go through the 8-step plan, I kind of watch for, that's a spending plan that's going to come to us. It came to me very different than I expected it to, but that's something for me to work through. And but again, just at the higher level, I'm supportive of the current draft and the current recommendations.
Ms. Dennis.
Thank you. So, well, I have mentioned this many times before. I'm a huge fan of all the work that the fire department, the police department, the wonderful library, parks, all the departments do here in Rochester. And I also think that there is a lot of amazing, innovative, very intelligent people in each of those departments. So when I look at some of this is what we want to spend money on, and this is going to be used for, I wonder if maybe instead of putting these in this hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into specific things like what I talked about, the health and wellness or some of the other programs, having a contingency fund in each department where the department head and key staff could say, you know what, we really need this for our department for mental health. We really need this in our department for, increased wellness, or I'm using the wellness as an example. Because when I was involved with the Youth Commission, which unfortunately is no longer around, they did a phenomenal job of saving money. And some other departments will say, well, if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, the Youth Commission would save it, and then they would have a balance left over. And it was like, well, this is amazing. And so an incentive to save taxpayer dollars might be to give control to the departments of, I don't want to use the word slush fund because that sounds really like, but a fund that they can say, this is a need in our department that we feel would best use this $50,000 or this $100,000, instead of saying, here we're going to put, 300,000 in this, and maybe your department won't utilize it and this other department will. And I think there's better ways of utilizing and protecting taxpayer dollars by giving control, not to the city administrator, not to the administration staff, but to actually the departments themselves, and let them, the leaders and the staff in the trenches say, hey, this is what we need in the parks, in the library, in civic music or all the wonderful public safety departments. And I feel that might be a better use of some of this money. And an incentive, like I said, to save, that if you don't spend it all this year, maybe you can save it and do something big for your department next year with it.
So Councilmember Dennis, I guess I didn't quite hear a question there, but I feel like it's important just to clarify, the city charter doesn't quite allow for that, nor do your policies about or state policy on how projects need to still come forward to the elected body at over a certain amount. I would say that if that were the case, then we would need to be funding all of the decision packages that came forward as 2024 requests, and your levy would probably be closer to 20% increase year over year. So I think that it would be a challenge to be able to bring forward something where everyone received a certain amount of money. The other policy that you have in your financial policies is that anything that is general fund levy supported at the end of the year, if there is remaining funds available, then that goes back towards the fund balance in the general fund in order to be able to meet the statutory requirements of not less than 5 months or 43% of the budget to be able to have in reserve. Our revenue source of property tax and some of our other sources of funding for the general fund are very much like a February and July situation where money comes in and the expenses continue to be paid in order to operate the city throughout the in-between months. So we have to have a fair amount of cash balance available in order to continue to pay employees every 2 weeks. So I appreciate the sentiment. That is the intent of this budget process, is that there are decision packages. We meet with all of the departments. All of the decision packages are created by the departments. And then we go through those and try to make sure that there's reasonable allocations, both for the baseline, which they also create, and for the decision packages that come forward so that the city administrator per the charter can bring forward a recommended budget that the city council can look at and determine whether or not it meets their collective policy decisions. There's a bit of wiggle room in the budget, but I would say most of these budgets, especially the larger ones, are primarily personnel driven. So to the point of, I believe, Councilmember Keen, if we're going to have the same service levels with the same number of people and meet our labor contract requirements, personnel budgets are not available to be used for non-personnel expenses. That's part of our financial policies. So if there's savings there, it goes back into the general fund or the other fund in order to build fund balance to come back for future policy decision making. So appreciate the sentiment. However, the way that the budget actually is created is not to create slush funds or other pots of money for departments to make different policy decisions throughout the year. It's really a policy document that the city council and elected officials look at and determine whether or not there's appropriate service levels based on input from the wonderful, talented and skilled staff that we have in each service area that comes forward with their recommendations.
Any other budget questions?
Could I follow up, Councilmember? I appreciate the fact that you just talked about each department provides the information that ended up in here. And a lot of it didn't, because as was pointed out, that would be a huge increase in the levy and one we can't afford and that our residents wouldn't support. But the ideas come from the departments, which includes the employees. So I think we do have some of that. And the one I would point to was one that's quite costly, which was the mental health and in the HR department and the support. And that actually came from a pilot that had been implemented and was positive and supported by not just the department, but others throughout the administration to bring forward to offer to other staff. So I think, you know, as someone who put my budget forward and maybe didn't get things funded that I asked for, you know, I was allowed to put in items, right? And we sat down and, you know, Michonne and I talked to a couple of the city council members to say, is there something that we need to add? Is there something that's missing? And that's what our administration and staff have done with their staff. So, you know, I know these are really difficult decisions, particularly when, you know, all of us that are elected are having to hand down something to our residents that's going to be hard to swallow. And in a growing community with the desires and needs that we have, it's something we're faced with year after year after year. And as was pointed out, the vast majority of what we fund is our staff. It is all about people that provide the services. So we have very little wiggle room, and that's kind of what we've been talking about, is the little bit of wiggle room that we have. And I know this has been difficult for the administration to come up with this, but I appreciate, what was brought forward. Would I like a few things that aren't in here? Sure. And I'll be back next year, and so will other administrators and staff members. They'll come back with those ideas, and we'll be down this path again. But I just want to thank the administration and staff for the work they did putting together something that, is tough for the council to have to swallow. But I think it's been pretty thorough, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Norton. Ms. Dennis.
Just one clarification. So I was not asked for input by the mayor, so not everyone was. But I do want to say that this packet that everyone has online, President, Councilmember Wall pointed out that is not the same as what we are looking at here and what we have in front of us. And as I mentioned, I didn't have email access this weekend nor today. So was there any other changes to what was in besides that slide 25? Besides slide 25, which is different on my
Slide 3 and 4 were added. This will be updated on the city's website with the new version. What went out on Friday reminded folks that we didn't have the information from Olmsted County. So this slide 3 and slide 4 is the updated information from Olmsted County, and that was updated. We also added one project that we missed onto slide 24.
Position.
It was, I don't think it was a new position, the EPR licenses.
All right, just want to make sure anything in the email.
Yeah, and those 2 slides early on with the county valuations are very helpful. And that will be updated for the public and us. Thank you all very much. I turn it over to the city administrator for our study sessions in the future.
Certainly. Thank you, Council President, Council members, Mayor Norton, on September 6th, a Wednesday, because that Monday is a holiday. So we will have many employees that are working on that holiday, but a number of buildings that are not open and folks that are not working. So on Wednesday at 3:30, you have a study session that's focused on an update on housing and ability to provide owner-occupied single-family housing at lower costs, as well as an update on people experiencing homelessness and some work that the team has been doing in order to bring back some more information to you in a way that balances both public safety and enforcement, use of public facilities, as well as some of the needs that our service partners have shared. So that's September 6th.
Mr. Palmer.
It's Wednesday, the 6th, right?
I believe it's Wednesday, the 6th. Is that date a Wednesday? Yes, Wednesday, the 6th.
Okay, and then would you be expecting to have an ordinance ready for us on the 10th and the
I believe that's part of the update that they will be providing. Perhaps Mr. Spindler Craig could provide more. I believe our partners wanted to talk a bit more about that.
will that be on reports and recommendations then?
It will not. It will be a study session that talks about an update about people experiencing homelessness and provide some context for some different ideas that came forward from teammates throughout, as we've been talking about trying to address the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business before the council? We are adjourned.